Paranoia doesn't come out of the blue. What we know is that it's attempts by people to understand social events. So, for example, the look on someone's face. But the problem is we don't know whether a look on someone's face reflects genuine hostility or whether they're not even thinking about us. What a rigorous scientific study would do is present many people with exactly the same neutral social situation and see who misinterpreted it in a paranoid fashion. But of course the problem is you can't give people exactly the same social situation. And also people who feel a bit paranoid often act in a way, for example, very timidly, that elicits different reactions from other people. So the solution we used in the study was to use virtual reality to present people with exactly the same social situation, a neutral social situation, a ride on a tube train. Virtual reality is an interactive computer environment. It consists of three basic pieces of equipment. There's a computer that produces an image, there's a headset that presents the images, and there's a tracker that feeds back the movement of the person to the computer so the image is altered. So what it does is it replaces your sense data about the reality, about the world around you, with the imaginary world provided by the computer. The tube scenario was very carefully developed. The tube was relatively crowded with computer characters called avatars. And these avatars were given human, lifelike movements. And the way that we did this was the technique of optical motion capture. This is often used in feature films. So real people are videoed with sensors on their bodies, and this information from the sensors is then used to animate the characters in the virtual train. So the characters breathe, they move around, they look around, and if you look at some of them for long enough, they'll look back at you. The results are striking. What we found that most people, as expected, thought the environment was very neutral. They thought that people were much like those on the tube, and they were just minding their own business and not that interested in them. The next most common response was very positive. They thought the characters were very friendly. I mean, some of the people thought the characters were flirting with them, for example. But a proportion of people, about 1 in 3, had a more negative response, and they had some paranoid thoughts about the train ride. So, for example, they thought someone in their train ride was trying to make them distress or to isolate them, or they were staring at them in order to upset them. So here's a couple of examples of that. I thought a couple of the men were stuck up and nasty. A lady sitting down laughed at me when I walked past. There was an aggressive person. His intention was to intimidate me and make me feel uneasy. What this very nicely illustrates is if you give people exactly the same neutral social situation, a proportion will view it as a positive experience, a proportion as a neutral, and some people will view it in a paranoid fashion. I sometimes liken it to going to watch a movie with someone. You walk out of the cinema and you thought that was the best film you've ever seen, but the person you've gone with has a completely opposite view, and it's a negative view of that film. And it's a bit like that with this social situation. But what is fantastic for the research is that we know that the people who thought the characters were being deliberately hostile to them were being paranoid. So we know that's a measure of pure paranoia. What this suggests, in the most unambiguous fashion to date, is that paranoia isn't just confined to those with severe mental illness. And it probably reflects the fact that in all our social interactions, we have to make a judgment about whether to trust or mistrust people. But it's a very difficult judgment to make, because often we just don't know. So therefore it's an error-prone judgment, and it's one that people often get wrong.